Hello and welcome to Insight. Today we have with us a dear friend of mine, Deep Halder, one of the most renowned journalists in India, whose career has spanned over 2 decades. His work deals with issues of development on the intersectionality of religion, caste and politics. Deep has also held many senior and powerful positions across the leading news outlets in India. Deep is considered the ultimate authority on India-Bangladesh relations, having written 3 books on the subject. His first book, also a bestseller, was Blood Island, an oral history of the Marichjhapi Massacre. His second book, Bengal 2021, an election diary, was also a bestseller. And now his third and latest release that we'll be talking about in this edition of Insight, Hindus in Bangladesh. Come join us as we discuss Deep's book as well as the future of Hindus in Bangladesh in the light of the coming elections. Deep, it's such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Rami. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Insight. I caught you in Delhi.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I believe, you've been traveling so much to Bangladesh and Calcutta. Congratulations. It's already a bestseller, your book being Hindu in Bangladesh.
Thank you.
It's a great cover, I have to say. And I was one of the few people who had heard about this book when you were writing and making the trips.
Yeah.
I also had the privilege of reading the introduction.
Right.
And I remember telling you that I can't, for me, it was heart-wrenching, just the introduction itself. You've done, as very few people in, as far as I know, a lot of field work. You've been on the field, you've met survivors, you've met victims. You have told me some of the most heart-wrenching stories. What did it take you to write this book, and what did it take out of you?
It's a loaded first question, Rami.
Wait till the other ones.
Yeah, but I think there were several times in this journey of sort of going to Bangladesh, coming back with field notes, and sort of starting the process of writing this book that I felt like stopping the process of writing the book, because it was so difficult in parts to sort of to carry on. Because when you meet survivors firsthand and they tell you their stories, it's very difficult then sometimes to pen them. First listen to them and see them up front breaking down, and then to come back and write it and try to make sense of it, try to see the bigger picture. It was a lot. So it took a lot from me. Thankfully, I had a co-journeyman, Abhishek Vishwas, who's an academic. So he would sometimes travel with me. Often he would be at the library trying to sort of make sense of what I was telling him in terms of the research he was putting in, because he actually spent a lot of time going back and forth in time, trying to see events as they were before the partition of India, after that part of the world became East Pakistan, and then in 71 when it became Bangladesh. And trying to sort of make sense of the current times by looking back at the past. So yeah, he was a great help, but it was a very tough job. It is a very tough job of going back to Bangladesh and speaking to Hindus in Bangladesh.
Yeah, not just physically, but also emotionally.
Yes.
It's taken a lot.
Yes, it has. Also because my parents come from there. Yeah. It was not Bangladesh then, it was East Bengal. And when they left, it had just become East Pakistan. So, I mean, these are stories I was shielded from as a child. But of course, as I got older, and they also knew that sort of I was doing this work. So more and more personal stories came out from them, things they told me. It was very difficult to know that, okay, this is perhaps where my ancient house was, and stuff like that. There's a place very close to Dhaka, which is almost an abandoned village, and I did a story for the print. It's a village of forgotten Hindu Havelis. So when I was doing the story, I looked at them and thought, something like that could have existed when my parents were there. When my grandparents lived here. Correct. And I don't even know if that physical structure exists, or even if it does, of course, it belongs to someone else now. So yeah, it was tough in that sense.
I can imagine, as all field work is, but therefore you produce a bestseller. But having said that, your first book also, which did so well, Blood Island, was about Hindu refugee massacre in communist Bengal.
Yes.
This book is about Hindus in Bangladesh. Is there a link?
It is. Of course, there's a link. It somehow links Blood Island to, somehow it's linked to Blood Island because it takes the story back and it takes the story forward. It's about Hindus who came from there. It's also about Hindus who did not come from there. So Blood Island was about Hindus who came from East Pakistan and mostly from East Pakistan to India over the course of several decades and tried to settle in Bengal, were not allowed, sent to the Underkarana. Then they found their way back during communist times to this small island in the Sundarbans, and they wanted to, they built a township there. And then the left front government didn't want them to be there, and they said the ecological laws were being violated, and there was a massacre, a state-sponsored massacre, and I found the survivors of the massacre, and I wrote the book. This goes back in time and tries to look at why Hindus had started leaving East Pakistan in the first place, and also it in a sense takes the story forward because it talks about Hindus who are still left in Bangladesh. So in that sense, the two books are connected.
But incredible, because you had this opportunity while you were on the field to meet these victims.
Yes.
Can you give us some sort of a real-time sort of idea of what they're going through at this point? Do they have any hope for any peaceful coexistence?
I don't know if it's the same everywhere. Survivors of massacres, if this complete sense of hopelessness they feel, I think it would be similar. It would be a similar experience everywhere. But I met this lady called Mukta Shaha. She's in Noakhali, and she is a survivor of the 2021 Noakhali anti-Hindu violence. The anti-Hindu violence started in Kumila district over a fake news that a Hindu had placed a copy of the Quran at the feet of Lord Hanuman. Okay, and later it was found out that it was a Muslim guy who did it. So that started a chain of events, attacks on temples and Durga Puja pandals, and led to deaths of Hindus across several districts of Bangladesh. Mukta Shaha is in Noakhali at that time, and from her window she saw her brother getting killed. So I met her, I met the family, I met her 10-year-old son, who still can't make sense of of what happened to their family. So it was very difficult because I spent an afternoon in that house. So this happened in 2021. And I went there exactly a year later. So, just before Durga Puja. And the violence happened during Durga Puja. So for her, Durga Puja means, and I have spoken to her since, Durga Puja means revisiting such a grave personal tragedy. So she says, and Durga Puja is the biggest festival for Bengali Hindus. So she said that, it makes no sense to me now to sort of feel very joyful during Durga Puja. I don't know if I'll ever feel any joy during Durga Puja because all I can remember is seeing my brother being thrashed to death, and I was helplessly behind. I mean, it was because they were stopped from getting out because there was a mob outside, so they would also have been killed. So from her window she saw, and there were people trying to break into their house, and there was a 10-year-old. She had a 10-year-old son next to her.
This is in your book, I assume?
This is in my book. It's in the first chapter itself, yeah.
And, would you say, because you mentioned that, it might not be the case across Bangladesh, but,
yes,
you also maybe would agree with me that, it's not, the Hindus are not one homogeneous group. There are different sects.
yes.
Are they treated all equally? Are they treated not equally?
No, that's the thing, because, one of the difficulties of writing this book is you're constantly trying to tell yourself that you should not be appropriating anybody's voice. So the experience of Mukta Shaha may not be the experience of, say, a Hindu police officer who's risen up the ranks, and who holds considerable influence in the police force, or for instance a sort of a major general rank officer in the military, or businessmen who have done exceptionally well. And there There are many such Hindus, who are there in the government, who are there in the private sector and have done very well. So is it their experience? Is the experience of Mukta Shah their experience too? Maybe not. I'm sure they're affected when they see such news, but you cannot just base it on the experience of survivors of violence or in today's Bangladesh to sort of broad base it and say, oh, every Hindu is feeling threatened. Having said that, I mean, they do, even off the record, when I spoke to some of the Hindus who are extremely well to do and sort of, who are in Dhaka or in Chittagong, they also feel a sense of deep unease when they see such headlines, when they get to sort of hear such news. So no, I mean, it's not the experience of every Hindu in Bangladesh, but they do wonder, the Hindus who are much better off, they do wonder why these things happen at a time when they have a friendly government in power.
But is that only just divided by finances or economy, how well-to-do you are and how well-to-do you're not, or is it also divided by Hindus being treated differently in the hinterlands as opposed to in Dhaka?
Again, that's very layered, because of course much of the anti-Hindu violence you would believe that takes place in the hinterlands. But in the hinterland also I've done a story, and it did very well for the print, that a 300-year-old Khali Temple.
Yes, I saw
in
that
the
story.
hinterland, it's one of the, I think the story did very well. It's being rebuilt by village Muslims. It was a 300-year-old temple that was washed away by the floods, and the Muslims have come forward to sort of fund the rebuilding of the temple. They have also appealed to the Hasina government. They are trying to reach out to the Indian government to build a big temple in that spot. So there are those stories also. So there are spaces even today within Bangladesh where the Hindu does not need to feel threatened, or there is actually something like a syncretic culture.
So I was in Sylhet recently, and one of the two temples I visited, which they call a Shakti Pit, which also had an adjoining Hindu school. But again, it was being supported by Hindus and Muslims both.
Yes.
So like you said, you just now said that, there is a syncretic culture. But would you really be true in saying that syncretic culture is alive and thriving and will continue to do so?
I'd say it's alive. I won't say it's thriving, because there is a threat, and it's not a threat just to Hindus. It's also a threat to Muslims who would want that syncretic culture to continue, because I think that the threat also is a threat to their Muslimness, if I can use that word, because it also tries to define what kind of Muslim they need to be. I've been speaking to a film actress in Dhaka, and she told me that I am told how to be a Muslim, what to do, what not to do. So the fundamentalist forces that threaten Hindus in Bangladesh also end up threatening Muslims who do not necessarily subscribe to that way of life or that line of thinking. So it's not thriving, I would say, but it's alive, the syncretic culture.
Because India and Bangladesh also have very close-knit cultural bonds.
They do, yes.
Recently I was at an event at the embassy where they were acknowledging and giving scholarships, the Bangladesh government, to the direct descendants of those who fought in the War of Liberation from India, which I thought was a very sweet gesture. People, Indians who had lost their lives for their independence. This sort of cultural interaction that we've had, do you think that is going to change anytime soon, especially with the elections coming up?
Elections are very important, because if you've tracked Bangladesh news that's coming out of Bangladesh, there's a lot of violence on the streets. There are peaceful protests, promise of peaceful protests, which on the ground are turning violent. There's arson, and journalists are being attacked. Journalists trying to cover the protests, they are being attacked. There's police action. There's attack on the police. Buses are being burnt. All kinds of things. Political workers have died, both from the ruling parties, political workers and opposition workers. There are claims and counterclaims, and all of that's happening. So elections are very, very important. The Jamaat can't participate in the elections. The BNP has said it won't participate in the elections. But it's a time when the minorities are sort of they feel very threatened, because post-poll violence, memories of post-poll violence are still very fresh. They remember what happened in 2001, even after 2001 sort of stands out as a horrific year when the BNP Jamaat came to power and stuff that happened. I had the opportunity to meet the current Bangladesh president, Shahabuddin Chuppu, and he headed a judicial committee in 2006 that looked at the violence of 2001, and he told me that there were like almost hundreds of Hindu women were raped in the course of a single night, and so it was horrific what happened in 2001. So those memories are fresh in people's minds, and whenever they see violence on the street and this kind of political insecurity in the country, I think they feel very, very threatened. So the election is very important.
So let me ask you this, of course, 2001 would be very relevant to them because, we are still only about 20 years from then,
Yeah.
Those people must have been younger. But let me ask you, under this dispensation, do they feel safer, or there is some sort of opening up of BNP also happening wherein they're appeasing the minorities?
There are Hindu leaders in the BNP, and I have spoken to them, I have interviewed them. But whether that there are some Hindu leaders who have risen to very prominent posts within the BNP. But whether having them having just a few mid-level, top-level, too few, I'd say, Hindu leaders in BNP would change the perception of BNP for a wider section of Hindus in Bangladesh, I'm not too sure. So I think still the hope, even if there is anti-incumbency, still the hope for Hindus in Bangladesh is Sheikh Hasina, because 15 long years, so you can understand there's a lot of anti-incumbency. But I think on this specific question, I think when they think of what is the alternative, they would come back to her in a large way.
So what would, somebody who's observed this very closely and you've met these people on ground, what do they think will happen if BNP comes into power?
So BNP and Jamaat are officially not together, though the protests that have been happening in Bangladesh before the elections, those protests are parallel protests. The demands are almost similar. Jamaat though has come out and said that they don't want man-made laws in Bangladesh anymore. They have officially said that they want Sharia. BNP has not said that, but and they have also said that we're not in it together. But the protests are being declared on the same day, the hartals, all of it. So but look, right now Jamaat cannot participate in the elections. Right now, BNP has said they won't. But I think there's always a sense that if BNP comes to power, Jamaat would be emboldened, even if they're not in government. So I think that sense is a very shockingly brings back memories which are very unpleasant.
And how long do you think the Jamaat can be kept away from this process?
From the process of not participating in polls, another 5 years one would expect, because if the elections are held now and if there's a majority. But I think Jamaat is also very, very, very popular. The sense of Jamaat.
That's really what I mean to ask.
Yes, I think so. Electorally, whether they are able to be in the government or not, or fight the elections or not, is one thing. But I think we should also look at their infiltration in the society, in various levels of society. I think that's a bigger threat. So it's one thing to say, okay, look, they have been kept at bay because the Supreme Court has said no to their appeal. It's another to say that they do not yield power on the streets. So that's a bigger worry, I think.
Because when you meet average Bangladeshi, they have so much of respect and love for India, and vice versa, when Indians meet Bangladeshis.
Yeah.
But there is this undercurrent that seems to have become hostile over a period of time.
Yes.
Why do you think that has happened?
This is a very favorite topic of discussion for me. From my home state, West Bengal, and from my city of birth, Calcutta. I mean, people keep going to Bangladesh, and there are singers and film stars and the culturati who go there, and they stay in this 5 neighborhoods of Dhaka, and they think everything is honky-dory because the language is similar. You sing similar songs. You have shared history. But if you go beyond those bubbles, you realize that it's not what is made out to be. Right. So yes, culturally there is a bond, and because of the language, that bond gets strengthened. But there is also a sense of unease with the idea of India. Somebody very, I can't name her, but somebody very higher up in the government, in the party, not the government, she told me that there is whenever she looks at the world map and she looks at the map of India, she sees this large chunk of Hindu-ness. Now, that sense you cannot take away from the non-Hindus in Bangladesh, the Muslims in Bangladesh, because there is a sense of a Hindu India, even if we don't always necessarily see it that way. So whether it's the World Cup loss, you might have seen some of the videos. I mean, people came out on the streets saying things like, we are so happy India lost. We wouldn't have been
this happy if
less happy if Bangladesh had won the World Cup. So
I was
that's
actually
shocking.
very surprised with that video. I know the video that you're talking about.
Yes.
I was very surprised by that because that's not really the sentiment you see on a one-on-one level,
Yeah.
And let me push you further here.
Yeah.
Why would they be threatened of a Hindu India that really, has such a secular nature yet has been so supportive of Bangladesh?
So India has been strategically very supportive of Bangladesh. The Modi government and the Hasina government, they have been, even the photo ops are great. But there is a sense of the Muslim identity, which in certain instances that the Indian press, sometimes the international press, most often put up, right, wrong, truth, half truth, those have a huge impact in Bangladesh. And many Hindus in Bangladesh, one of the slurs is that you are Indian, right? And they can't get away from it. There are other slurs, but one of it is you are Indian. It's expected that they would support India in a cricket match or otherwise. While that necessarily may not be so. I mean, they may feel very they may look at India as a neighborhood country and not a country which they are in any sense related to, except West Bengal, which speaks the same tongue. And I think the timeline is very important, Rami, because if you the 71 generation, the class of 71, that actually saw and sensed the War of Independence, that generation is now old. Yes. Right. So, and Hasina has been in power for 15 years. So imagine a 20-year-old. So a 20-year-old would only have seen Hasina without a sense of history, right? They won't know what is West Pakistan. They only know West Pakistan. They won't know what West Pakistan army did to them, irrespective of your religious identity, to East Pakistanis during the War of Independence. So they would only feel the anti-incumbency. In fact, one of the things that Hasina is attacked with is that she's often, by BNP and others, she's often called a Hindu. I mean, there are videos and reels on Instagram and Facebook where there are marches on Dhaka streets calling her a Hindu. And the line is in Bengali, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Sheikh Hasina's Baper Naam, as in Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Sheikh Hasina's father's name. It's a very, very popular jingle in protest rallies. So her closeness to our Prime Minister also does not necessarily play out well with a large section of the population of Bangladesh.
That's incredible to hear.
Yeah.
But you've met people from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of age groups. What do you think we're missing? Because we have great government-to-government interactions,
yes.
But yet clearly with what you're saying and what is in your book, there has been a deficit in the people-to-people connect, like you rightly pointed out, and I noticed this as well, that most of the people who'd come for the scholarship ceremony were of an age that is not going to be around for a long time.
Yes.
And their memories haven't really resonated, with now the newer generation, which is 2 or 3 generations down.
There's a joke that a Hindu in Bangladesh, I won't take his name for obvious reasons, put up yesterday. He said this Chicha was so happy to see India lose that he shouted in joy, and then he had a heart attack. And now the only option left for him is to go to India to get a good treatment, So I mean the 71 generation, the sense of what happened in 71 needs to somehow come back in Bangladesh, which for generations after, I think they lose out. I was a little critical of the film Mujib, The Making of a Nation by Shyam Benegal, but I was looking at it very cinematically. But I think the movie did very well in Bangladesh.
Why were you critical?
I was critical because I said it's a hastily made film. I thought that, but I was critical not about the film. I think that if you make a movie on, say, Gandhi in India or Sheikh Mujib in Bangladesh or, say, Jinnah in Pakistan, you can't make an honest movie because of the nature
Correct,
of people, of the character. And I think you have to, on this at least, you have to look at the West, who are perhaps more self-critical of their heroes than we are. We deify them, and you can't say a single thing against them. You see what happens with Gandhi, for instance. I mean, you can't say a thing against I mean, it's very politically incorrect still to sort of criticize Gandhi. Same with Sheikh Mujib, same I would believe with Jinnah. But I think I was pleasantly surprised to see the film doing so well, and a lot of youngsters seeing the film, because I think a lot of young people who do not know their history that well, through the film, discovered 1971, that period, you know, what Pakistan was doing to them, and the mass rapes and the rape camps and all of that that happened irrespective of who you were. I mean, whether you were a Muslim or a Hindu. I mean, Hindus faced the
brunt of it,
but even Muslims suffered. So the idea of what Sheikh Mujib stood for later, and what Hasina stands for, I think that film reminded young Bangladesh of who they were. I think that sense needs to come back, because right now you are only looking at, I mean, the Bangladeshi people are only looking at what Hasina may not be doing right.
Correct.
15 years is a very long time.
It's a long time.
Yeah. So, but they need to revisit what happens if a different idea of Bangladesh comes to the fore. Anyway, a different idea of Bangladesh negates the idea of Bangladesh. I mean, that's also something that needs to be spoken about more, because there are forces inimical to the idea of Bangladesh within Bangladesh which are very powerful. I think that is a core point that often gets missed. Even I sort of sometimes in arguments I miss out on that point, that if not Hasina, who? We often forget that the other idea is almost an abyss. So it's a no-go zone, at least from the India viewpoint.
But here we are, yet, on this crux where we don't know what is going to happen next to one of our closest neighbors.
Yes, on January 7.
On January 7.
And the years after.
And the years after, because it will have long-standing impact on not just Bangladesh, but on India as well.
Yes. So somebody asked me when I pointed out, when I did the tweet on, this glee that a huge chunk of Bangladeshi population showed when India lost. And somebody asked that, is in the India view on Bangladesh correct? So I said that India needs to take a harder look on Bangladesh. I mean, what's happening now is fine, but the people of Bangladeshi civil society also needs to be looked at. And like I said, you need to keep going back to 71, because you should know your origin story before you look at the future. You should know where you came from.
Correct. And that reminder of those times should always be alive.
Yes.
And yes. But tell me something. You spoke about this young man who was elated with the loss of India. What is it like at university campuses? And I ask this because I know that you have made some sort of inroads in university campuses and interviewed people. Do the minorities really have a voice at that age? Or are they too scared?
They're not too scared always. I mean, they're aware that not everybody is their ally, but they do have allies. I mean, within Jagannath Hall, which is a cluster of minority hostel buildings in Dhaka University campus, there were Muslim students who had walked in. I did an interview with one of them too, and he's, the Hindu boys were telling me that he's such a great friend. And there are amazing examples. For instance, Saraswati Puja is big in Jagannath Hall, and there are Muslim students who are in the committee to decide how the idol should be, how the design should be. I mean, that's wonderful. And those examples are there to say that it's all gloom and doom is not right. But I think any debate on secularism, multiculturalism tend to sort of get very sentimental before it takes a hard look at the bigger picture. So I think while these examples are there, you also need to constantly keep an eye on the threat and how big the threat is becoming by the day. So while these are wonderful examples to cite and to sort of rejoice, and it is also necessary to visit the hinterland, to visit also spaces of Dhaka, to constantly look at the lived reality of Hindus everywhere across Bangladesh, to see if the other sense of Bangladesh is threatening them.
Correct.
So and that's an area I would say of concern.
Correct. Though you've elaborated on this, we're coming towards the end of this interview, so I want to ask you in a nutshell, what do you think, irrespective of the dispensation change, irrespective of what happens in the elections, and if there is a dispensation change, who knows, where do you think the minorities are going in Bangladesh? Will they have some peace of mind, some space?
Different. I think we need more strong minority voices from Bangladesh. I think this book is fine, but I think Bangladeshi Hindus need to more aggressively talk about themselves, become community leaders, and not just in the political sense. Thought leaders and industry leaders. They need to have a sense of their community. One of the disconnects that I see is there are individual examples in Bangladesh of Hindus who have done extremely well, but whether they necessarily think or represent the community, I think that is something they need to take a hard look at. So I think the community needs to come together more strongly, and not just when there is a crisis, like there's a riot or there's anti-Hindu violence. I think the community needs to at all times speak about itself more often, and people who have done well in the community, they need to have a sense of community, because I have a sense that not all of them are very connected.
And why would that be, considering it's not a very large number?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they are not all, but at least some of them, I think they're just happy being who they are. But I think that won't help the community at large.
Well, we can only be hopeful. Yes. And see what happens with the upcoming elections. Yes. And pray for the safety of minorities in Bangladesh, and hope that, the younger generation in India and in Bangladesh connect better on more common ground than they have been. But finally, let me ask you, Deep, what is next for you? I know you churn out books by the year.
Yeah.
So are you already starting on your next book?
No, I'm not. I want to take like I said, the first question, it took a lot to write this book. So I want to take a very big breather and not do anything for a while.
But is it going to be Bangladesh again? Because
I'm writing on Bangladesh for the print. Yeah. But I think I hope to continue doing that for a while. But not another book. But I'll observe Bangladesh very closely.
Well, you're known to do that. You're obviously, the final word on India-Bangladesh relations. You have so much of ground knowledge, which I'm so impressed with, because I think fieldwork really forms the basis of, any opinion that you make. But thank you for taking the time out and being here, and it was great to have you.
Thank you.
Till your next book.
Thank you.
That was Deep Halder, one of the foremost authorities on India-Bangladesh relations, with his formidable work on the field, on the ground in Bangladesh, and his concern for the Hindu minorities that still live on in Bangladesh. It is a question that we all wait to hear the answer to. What is going to happen post the elections in January in Bangladesh? What is the future of the Hindus in Bangladesh? Thank you for watching. Until next time.